The Elimination Chamber. You've simply got to love it, haven't you? Well, maybe not if you're one of the poor sods who's tasked with bumping on the cold, unforgiving steel or being propelled into the painful plexiglass. But for the comfortable sadists like you and I, it's a right load of fun, isn't it? When WWE get it right and have 6 big stars in the mix, all vying over a top title, they can turn out to be some of the best and most dramatic matches of the year. Of course, that's assuming that WWE have half a dozen top-line wrestlers to put in there, because that hasn't always been the case in Chamber's past. This is especially true when there are multiple Chamber matches on one show, but that's not always the reason for some of the strange entrants that we've seen. Injuries happen, backstage politics play a part, and some seem like they at least make sense in theory at the time, but look completely bizarre in hindsight. Now, for this countdown, we are only talking about the traditional men's singles Elimination Chamber matches, because there have been more of them than any other, and if I considered the tag team, women's or women's tag chamber matches, I would be here all friggin' day. And there's a classic Who Wants to Be a Millionaire episode about to start any minute now, and I really don't want to miss it. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 unusual Elimination Chamber competitors. Join us. Number 10, Hardcore Holly. The 2006 December to Dismember was, to be very kind, an absolute pissing shambles. Only 2 official matches had been announced ahead of time. A tag bout pitting the Hardys against M&M, and an Extreme Elimination Chamber bout. The Extreme Elimination Chamber, which was just a regular Elimination Chamber match but with added weapons, was for the ECW title, with Big Show defending against Bobby Lashley, Test, CM Punk, Rob Van Dam, and Sabu. The suicidal, homicidal, and genocidal Hardcore Legend was taken out of the match via a lame off-camera backstage angle and replaced with, of all people, Hard Bob Sparkcore Pluggy himself. Now, Hardcore was a hell of a hand and was in the midst of a push on WWE C-Show, but he wasn't a main event star, having been long presented as a veteran mid-card act on TV. Just because he picked up a couple of wins on the third brand didn't make him a believable contender. Not only that, but fans who attended or ordered the show, which granted wasn't many, were left confused and in some cases annoyed by Sabu's removal, which it later transpired was due to behind-the-scenes disciplinary issues. Hardcore started the match with Rob Van Dam and was the second participant eliminated when Test booted his surly face clean off. Number 9, Big Daddy V. Nelson Frazier was, with all due respect to the big man, one of WWE's worst headliners ever. The former Mabel was a complete dud as 1995's King of the Ring and would-be challenger to WWE champion Diesel. His later mid-card runs as Viscera, whether as the gothic Ministry of Darkness enforcer or the world's largest love machine, were far from befitting. But WWE are nothing if not a company that never learns, and so it was hardly a surprise when Big Daddy V was jolted up the card and entered into the world title mix once again. He competed in the ECW and SmackDown Elimination Chamber match at 2008's No Way Out, entering at number 3. While Michael Cole got good use out of his book of big man wrestler metaphors, harping on about how Big Daddy V's hands were the size of skillets and how him stepping on you was like getting run over with a minivan, the man himself didn't look anywhere near as impressive as the commentary would make out. He was just there to make up the numbers, coming in third and being the first eliminated after just a few minutes of action. This was essentially the last hurrah for Frazier in WWE, as he was released just a few months later after hardly being used on television. Number 8, The Great KALI. Also in that 2008 SmackDown and ECW chamber match was The Great KALI. Clearly, with Big Daddy V and KALI in the chamber, WWE were going for a classic freak show monster vibe that year. Sadly, KALI did manage to fit inside of his pod, which disappointed me at the time, as I was hoping he would have to duck his head and crouch or squat down before his official match entry. KALI's inclusion here did make sense, as he was a former world heavyweight champion, but he wasn't much more successful than the man who entered before him, as he came in fourth and was eliminated second, again just after a few minutes of action. 4 years later, the Punjabi Playboy was put in the same match again, this time fighting for Daniel Bryan's world heavyweight title. By this point, his stock had diminished at about the same rate as his mobility, as his knees turned to powder and he basically became a walking punchline, reduced to doing things like the KALI kiss cam and umpteen unfunny segments with Hornswoggle or the Divas. His sudden reposition as a contender to a main title was born out of necessity, as he was drafted in to replace an injured Mark Henry. Naturally, KALI entered 5th and was the first person eliminated in the match. Number 7, Santino Marella. Speaking of comedy characters entered into the 2012 World Heavyweight Title Elimination Chamber match, just what the hell was Santino friggin' Marella doing in there anyway? Well, Santino, like KHALI, was called upon when another planned member of this snake-bitten match went down injured. Randy Orton, who was no doubt one of the favourites to win the match, suffered a concussion and had to be replaced, with the unlikely Santino winning a battle royal to receive the honour. Next to champion Bryan, giants KHALI and Big Show, and young potential breakout stars like Cody Rhodes and Wade Barrett, Marella stuck out like a sore thumb. It was fair to assume that he would enjoy a quick cameo and then maybe do something stupid like attempt the Cobra only to get his hand stuck between the steel chains or something and then be sent packing. But what actually happened was pretty darn great, as Santino entered fourth and shockingly eliminated Barrett and Rhodes before finding himself one-on-one with D-Bry. The crowd were electric when it looked like the suddenly serious Milan Miracle could pull off a major upset, but it was sadly not to be. He gave a great showing and created a genuinely memorable moment, but the whole thing exists in a weird vacuum since it didn't lead to anything substantial. Number 6, Chris Masters and CARLITO. The early Elimination Chamber matches were typically star-studded affairs, as the gimmick was wheeled out intermittently and was usually reserved for the main event of major pay-per-views. And more often than not, wrestlers would have to qualify to be in the match, as was the case at New Year's Revolution 2006, where 5 wrestlers challenged for John Cena's WWE title. Of those 5, Shawn Michaels, Kane and Kurt Angle all passed the headliner test, but there were 2 wildcards in the form of CARLITO and Chris Masters. The Masterpiece hadn't been on the roster for a full year at this point and was something of an unproven commodity in the ring, while Mr. Cool was relatively new on Raw and hadn't moved beyond the Intercontinental title level. Seeing them suddenly elevated to the main event like this raised a few eyebrows, especially when established stars like Big Show, Triple H and Ric Flair had all failed to qualify for the match. Considering the careers of both men failed to live up to expectations as they were never able to truly break out of the mid-card pack, going back and seeing them try to hang with a quartet of Hall of Fame guys is a little peculiar. That said, credit to WWE for trying something new here. Number 5, MVP. Back to 2008 now for one of the most eclectic and, let's be honest, one of the weakest chamber lineups ever. We've already covered the colossal KHALI and Big Daddy V, but there were also a couple of decidedly mid-card talents put in there for The Undertaker and Batista, the only 2 who stood half a chance of winning, to blast through. Finlay was also put in there, though with his experience and noted toughness, as well as his recent push as a participant in the Mr. McMahon and Hornswoggle saga, his inclusion is not so head-scratching. MVP's entry into the chamber, on the other hand, certainly raised some eyebrows. He was the reigning United States champion and a featured part of SmackDown, but he was still some way off the level of the Animal or the Dead Man. The ballin' superstar was attacked by Taker after trying to hide in his pod, instantly making him look like a geek. Then, after failing to wear the Phenom down, he tried to run away and ended up getting chokeslammed from the top of a pod and subsequently eliminated. This was just a couple of minutes after entering the match at number 6. It could have been a good showcase for MVP, but he was treated like a total afterthought. Number 4, Vladimir Kozlov. Triple H, The Undertaker, Edge, Jeff Hardy, The Big Show, Vladimir Kozlov. One of those things is certainly not like the others, is it? 5 of those lads are legendary superstars, and one is Vladimir Kozlov. No disrespect to the Moscow Mauler, who I'm sure could and happily would rip my silly little head off, but he sticks out like a sore thumb in that lineup. Kozlov entered the chamber as undefeated on television and had been in the title mix for the previous few months, though he ultimately came up short. The 2009 No Way Out WWE Title Elimination Chamber match began with a shock, as Jeff Hardy pinned reigning champion Edge with an inside cradle just a few minutes into the bout. Big Vlad was in next, and while he lasted a good 15 plus minutes and was booked to look dominating, he was the second man to be eliminated. The honor of handing Kozlov his first pinfall loss fell to Undertaker, who got rid of him with a last ride. Following that, he suffered televised losses in singles matches to Taker and Shawn Michaels as the Kozlov experiment came to an end and he was transferred to ECW. Given how his career ended up, with him in a silly tag team with Santino, it's certainly odd to look back and see how far WWE were willing to go with him despite his quite obvious lack of, well, anything. Number 3, Ted DiBiase Jr. Though the 2010 Raw World Title Elimination Chamber match was all about who would leave with the belt on the last major stop on the road to WrestleMania, there were still plenty of opportunities to further other angles and storylines that didn't concern the strap. Sheamus and Triple H had their thing going, John Cena was trying to fight against the odds, obviously, and then there was the intrigue over how Randy Orton and his legacy stablemate Ted DiBiase Jr. would coexist, with tension between the two and Cody Rhodes having recently escalated. Things started off well as the duo successfully teamed up, but when the grandson of a plumber showed up with a lead pipe, the $1 Million Boy showed his true colors by blasting the Legend Killer with it and cemented his status as a heel and Orton's adversary. And that's all well and good, but DiBiase was almost immediately pinned afterwards by Kofi Kingston, who was so clearly in the match just to make up the numbers. Ted's big moment was forgotten about quicker than you could say trouble in paradise. And for such a high-profile heel to turn on such a big stage, Ted's career after the fact didn't amount to much, making his placement here seem all the stranger in hindsight. Number 2, Kevin Nash. The second ever Elimination Chamber match took place at the main event of 2003 SummerSlam, with 3 of the competitors of the original match being joined by 3 newbies in the Devil's Playground. Triple H was, once again, the World Heavyweight Champion and defending against Shawn Michaels, Chris Jericho, Randy Orton, Kevin Nash, and Goldberg. Leading into the match, it was all about Goldberg, as many predicted it would be his night to win the big one and end the game's reign of terror. Y2J and HBK didn't have much of a chance, but could be counted on to make the match, good, while Orton was in there to assist his Evolution pal if need be. But what about Nash? Just what the torn quad was he doing there? It's a good question, and I'm not sure there's a good reason besides to add some star power, because this was Big Sexy's last WWE match for 8 years, and he had absolutely no chance of winning the thing, having already failed to dethrone the Cerebral Assassin in multiple previous matches. Not only that, but his stock had fallen dramatically, to the point that he had lost his hair in a match with Jericho, something he actually required anyway in order to film his role in the movie The Punisher, which is exactly what he went and did after entering 4th, doing his greatest hits, and barely breaking a sweat before getting eliminated first by Jericho after eating some sweet chin music. Number 1, Mike Knox. You all remember Mike Knox, don't you? The big bloke with the massive unkempt beard. No, not him. Or him. No, not him either. You see, they all had charisma and defining traits other than their impressive facial hair, unlike Foxy Knoxy. Mike Knox's WWE highlights include getting cut by Kelly, getting kicked and then big lead by Shawn Michaels and Triple H, and his appearance here in the 2009 Raw World Heavyweight Title Elimination Chamber match. Knox gained entry into the match in the most innocuous way imaginable, winning a 6-man battle royal on a non-televised house show. And it's clear that looking at the field, champion John Cena, Rey Mysterio, Kane, Chris Jericho and Edge, who attacked and replaced Kofi Kingston before he entered, that Knox, like KOZLOV earlier in the night, was a little bit out of his depth. Not a complete shocker then when he was eliminated second by Jericho after not getting the opportunity to do much of anything in what turned out to be his last WWE pay-per-view appearance. Knox then began the sad, inevitable slide down the card before he completely faded into obscurity and was released. Don't worry, Mike, I still love ya, which is why I made you this sign.